Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm Gino Parati. I'm the lead coach and lead educator for Right Brain Journeys. I'm also a lecturer at some colleges here in New York City, and I do these sessions about once a month. These are my LinkedIn Live learning sessions. And the purpose of these sessions are to share the life-changing information that we have in our field, which is interpersonal and business communication. So really, it's about understanding how the human being, the human animal, operates in a specific context, either relationships, which is the interpersonal side, or here on LinkedIn, I focus much more on the business and professional side of things. So, how we as human beings, we as human animals, operate within the context of the business and professional world. That's the focus of these learning sessions. The topic for today's session is really foundational. It's having to do with language and how we create meaning for our lives as human beings. And I want to point out, notice I said create meaning, not find meaning, which is a popular way that people are really thinking about meaning and purpose today, that it's something that we have to discover and it's just there. It may be unconsciously there, but we as human beings create meaning for our lives by how we define situations. We essentially become meaning-making creatures. So that's what we're going to do today is look at the foundational area of language, something that we just take for granted, which is definitions of certain words. And in this case, the topic is how do we find success? And I'll also tie that into the word happiness. So for those just joining, welcome. These sessions are about 20 minutes long. They are live. So I am able to monitor the chat throughout. If there's a question that you have, please feel free to type it into the chat and I'll either answer it right in the moment if it seems like that's a good time to pause and address that question, or more likely I'll save it to the end of about 20 minutes, which is around how long this session will take. And then I'll spend up to 10 minutes answering any questions that you may have. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining from. I live in New York City. I'm in Queens, and I am joining you from my home broadcasting studio, which used to be my living room, but here we are now. It's my broadcast studio. So again, we're getting into this topic. How do you define success? And this came about in a timely way. I assign an autobiography assignment to my business communication students, and we started the semester about 5 weeks ago. So that's one of the first assignments they have is to provide them with a set of instructions to start thinking about in a professional context, who am I? And then how do they present that? Hey, Maribel, glad to see you. And then how do they present that to a group of peers, but not peers as students, but peers as fellow aspiring professionals. And it was a lot of information that came back. A lot of it was expected. I'm studying this. I plan to go into this field. But then I saw some things like their goals. So the assignment asked them to tell us about their short and long-term career aspirations. Some of the students talked about making a lot of money, and others talked about earning a high salary. And you see, I'm putting a lot and high in quotations because I'm really curious what their definitions of a lot and high are and how they may or may not align with mine and their peers' definitions of that. One specific student said that they hope to own a successful business one day. And it really was that response that prompted this topic because I started to give the students some feedback. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that many professionals haven't even gotten to this point of really consciously defining things like success and a lot and a high salary. And I'll talk in a moment just about why this is a really important thing for us to consciously define these things. By the way, you'll see me looking down at my notes here. I also teach and coach public speaking, which is one of my main brands here on LinkedIn. I'm a public speaking coach, and I teach an extemporaneous style, which means you know the topic, I know what I want to say, but I have notes so I can keep myself on track and make sure I hit all the important highlights. So when you see me looking down and not engaging with you through the camera, it's because I'm using my notes down here. So we just blindly accept if we're not consciously defining these things for ourselves, success, happiness, we just blindly accept the definitions that are given to us. And who gives us those? Well, the people who raise us. So our families, definitely our schools, which means our cultures that we grew up in. The schools become a major system in which to enculturate, or in other words, teach people how to be citizens of a particular culture. We get them definitely from media, from religion. And they give us these definitions, which as children, we're like little sponges. So we absorb these things without ever really defining them for ourselves. And then that means that other people have set the baseline for us, the measurement of what happiness, success is. So really, then we spend our adulthoods chasing other people's metrics of what success and happiness and a lot of money, a high salary is. And why that matters is it really may not align with who you are as an individual. So that's the focus of what I'm going to be getting into. So I want to help you become more conscious communicators through this lesson by asking you some questions, which I provided as feedback for my students on this assignment. So the first one, very simple question, but this really is the foundation. How do you define success? How do you define happiness? Some additional questions then that we can ask ourselves to get to those much larger questions are, how will you know when you are successful or not? Are you successful now or not? Is it a feeling? So when you are successful, when you reach that point, or if you think you're successful now, is there a feeling, an emotion that accompanies that? Is it a destination? I am successful when I reach this place. It could be when I'm a vice president, or I'm a CEO, or when I own my own business, or when I make my first $1 million. Those would be measurements of success as a destination. So when I arrive there, I'll be happy. Then reflect upon what has influenced your decision. Go back to some of those early things like culture, families, media, religion, and think about the messages that you were given, the values that were in place in those worlds in which you grew up. You were the little sponge that absorbed. So how are you then defining your feelings, your destinations for success and happiness based on what has influenced you? What emotions do you attach to your definition of success? So what I mean by that is there some level of ego involvement? I will feel worthy if I am successful, meaning I will feel worthy if I have a title like vice president, CEO, owner, founder, entrepreneur. I will feel worthy if I have X amount of dollars in the bank account. So if you feel worthy, that's an emotion which is actually driving you to your definition of success. You may think it's the money, you may think it's the title, but it's not really. Those are just vehicles, pathways through which you're trying to access the emotion of worthiness. And a breakthrough insight there, which is something I often coach people through, a breakthrough insight is the sense of worth, that feeling is accessible to you at every moment when you know how to actually unlock it and tap into it. You don't actually have to achieve those things in order to feel worthy about yourself. So if this is something that's interesting to you, please feel free to reach out to me here on LinkedIn and we will definitely chat about it. The second question I have for you. So the first one is, how do you define those things? The second question had to go along with this for the students who answered this question with short-term or long-term goals. I want to make a lot of money. I want to make a high salary. So this really becomes a question about quantification because a lot and high are subjective. So how do you quantify that? What's a lot of money? What's a high salary? Plus, is it only money? So when you're imagining a high salary or a lot of money, do you also envision other benefits too? Younger people who are starting in the workforce often don't consider, I find it's compared to older people who've been in the workforce for a while, because people who've been in the workforce for a while start to understand the value of other benefits such as paid vacation and of course paid healthcare, paid retirement, support for stay-at-home care, whether you're a parent or you have to take care of elderly relatives, something like that, elder care. All those things wrap into the overall benefits package, which really can be a money exchange, right? Because you get to pay for those things out of your pocket, then it would be money out of your own pocket. So is it only money when you quantify a lot of money and a high salary? Do you think your concept of a lot or high might change over time? I ask that because I use myself as an example when I'm in the classroom and when I'm working with clients. which is I'm now 44. So I entered the workforce at 21. And my definition of a lot of money, because of the time and inflation, was very different. But also my needs in life, the people I was taking care of, the idea of retirement was so far away at that point. The amount of skills that I had in exchange for the value I was bringing to an employer versus the value in money that I expected to be reflected back to me. All that, of course, has shifted in time as I get older. I change, my life responsibilities change, my skill set improves. So I now have more value. Therefore, I require more value to be reflected back to me in this exchange with business partners that I collaborate with. So that becomes my question to you is how might these definitions change over time? The salary that I started with as a young person is now what I make doing part-time work. That's not even my full-time salary. So that's no longer a lot of money in my mind. It shifts, right? So consider how that definition may shift and change over time for you so that you can really update as you potentially interview and make career pivots, that you can update your concept of a lot in a high salary and feel comfortable and confident asking for it when you know you're worthy of it. The other question is, what emotions do you attach to your definition of money? So the previous one in the how do you define success and happiness was what emotions do you attach to your definition of success? In this area, it's what definition do you, or excuse me, what emotions do you attach to your definition of money? And this one's always a fascinating thing to get into with people. Some people fear money. They fear not having enough. So that's the scarcity mindset, which I'm sure you've heard of. And I know people who are millionaires that it's never enough. And it's not that they, well, some of them do spend a lot of money, but some of them save it all. And they're saving it from a scarcity mindset because they fear that they will never have enough money. Some people fear having too much money, and they learn that being wealthy was somehow attached to not being a good person, that if you had a lot of wealth, that you were perhaps unethical because you only make that much money if you're unethical. So these are limiting and not true belief systems that become emotional attachments that some of us have to money. And why that matters, which I mentioned earlier, and it's something I talk about all of the time in my work. If you check out my other stuff on LinkedIn, one of the classes I teach is persuasion. And we know from that field that it's not just thoughts that drive our behaviors. It's our emotions about those thoughts. The emotions, E for emotions, are energy. So think E emotions, E energy. Emotions are energy in our body, and that energy radiates out from us. I think that the easiest way to get people to realize, that actually sounds right, instead of something just weird, is think of the heat of anger or the heat of passion. When you feel such strong emotions as anger or passion, there's a heat in our bodies and you can feel that temperature change. And of course, other people can feel that if they're standing nearer to us. We can feel heat, which is energy. So yes, emotions are energy and we feel it, of course, in our own body. And then that drives our behavior. And then people around us can also pick up on and perceive the energy of our emotions. So the emotions we have about money really do become the behaviors that we have that will either attract money in a healthy or unhealthy way and repel money in a healthy or unhealthy way. So that's why getting to the root cause of this with asking these questions is really important, because it's really uncovering unconscious beliefs which point out the emotional connections. If we learn to change how we think about it, it can change the way we feel about it. And then we know if we change the way we feel about it, it'll change the behaviors. And the behaviors that we do consistently create our reality. Right? Here we are in February. Think of fitness plans. The new year is always a great time for people to start a fitness journey. And those who succeed will continue their journey. If you've already quit, you went real hard in January and then you burned yourself out and you already quit, you're very unlikely to meet your fitness goals for 2023. It's something you have to consistently do. So that's what I mean. The behaviors become consistent, lead to the changes, the outcomes for our lives. So all of this, what I've been talking about, this is the work that I call conscious communication. And even though I'm a public speaking coach, that's the brand that's most easiest to market on LinkedIn. But overall, I do so much more than that. It's called conscious communication, is really what I call the umbrella of what I do with my clients through coaching and consulting, and with my students in the classroom here at the college in New York City. What is conscious communication? Conscious communication is digging deeply into our abstract ideas and unconscious beliefs. Digging deeply into our abstract ideas and unconscious beliefs. It's taking ownership of how we define and experience our lives, which means we recognize that we're responsible for our lives, meaning we're responsible for how we react to the things. And a reaction or an action, what we consistently do, becomes how we experience our lives. Conscious communication is about having intimate conversations with ourselves so that we can really understand our deepest desires and the meaning and purpose that these deepest desires have and bring to our lives. And this is important because it can eliminate some real emotional roadblocks, which would be shame and guilt. Oftentimes, preconditioned value systems, whether it's from families or cultures or religions or media or any other type of influencers, cultural influencers in our lives, give us a message. But at the core of who we are, we may have some deep desires that really don't align with the values from these other messages, from these other cultural influences. And so we end up having resistance because I actually do want that, but I don't think I should want it. My heart knows that I want it, but my head says, no, you shouldn't want it. No, you can't want it, because that's the conditioning that was put in our heads. So now we end up working against ourselves, and there's resistance in our lives. It doesn't flow as easily. This is all important. Conscious communication is important because, and I like to support this with a quote from one of my undergraduate business professors from back in the 90s when I was working through my undergrad. His name was Dr. Hinton. Dr. Hinton used to say, and I paraphrase because I don't remember his exact words, but this was his message. If we don't know where we're going, how will we know when we get there? If we don't know where we're going, how will we know when we get there? The whole point of that is saying, is there a destination? Is there a goal in mind? If we don't know where we're moving towards, how will we know when we reached the destination, when we've reached the goal? So tying this back here, if we don't ever stop to think about how we define success or happiness, then how will we know when we've reached that area, when we've achieved success or happiness, when we're allowing success or happiness to flow into our experiences? Or another way to think about it, and I think this is actually more accurate, success and happiness is an ever-evolving target. So once you achieve one thing, it's really not about achieving success or happiness. It's really about being a creator. It's really about creating things that are valuable to the world, to other human beings. And then success and happiness ensue. They're something that are a byproduct of us bringing value into the world. So in that case, creativity becomes the goal, and happiness and success are natural byproducts of it. So conscious communication, this is probably the easiest way for you to think about it. Conscious communication, what is it? I've already talked about why it's important. Conscious communication is how we begin to connect our head with our heart. And it's when our thinking head and our feeling heart, it's when these are aligned, that we are powerful actors that can bring our deepest desires to life. Why? Because we're not working against ourselves anymore. It's not that conflict between the two. With knowing our deepest desires, the desires give us a destination, and it's a place where we know with our head and we feel with our heart. That's where we want to arrive. So we're going to align our behaviors to get there. We're going to do the work that it takes when we want to be there with our head and our heart. An important question that someone has asked me about this, which is very insightful. Isn't it just easier to go with how others define success and happiness for us? Meaning, if my culture, my schools, my family, my religion, if all of these enculturation influencers have already given me something in terms of definitions, can't I just go with it? Sure. The question is whether it's easier to go with it. And I think that question is yes or no. And it actually comes back to the point of this conversation, which is definitions. So give me about 5 more minutes and I'll finish this up. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop into the chat. And in about 5 minutes, I'll take any questions that you may have. Is it just easier to go with how other people define success? Yes and no. I think it's based on how you define the word easy. So for me, easy is not about the amount of work that's involved. It's more a feeling at being at ease and being in peace and being in a state of flow. So let me repeat that. It depends on how you define easy. If you think easy is I'm going to do the least amount of work involved, then perhaps it's easier for you to just go with the other people's definitions. For me, easy is not about the volume of work. I'm not scared of work. For me, easy is about a feeling of being at ease. What does that mean? I said about your head in one place and your heart in another. That's resistance. Resistance is not easy. It's like running with weights on. It makes it harder to do the work. I'm not scared to run, but I don't need to add extra weights on this to make it any harder than it needs to be. So for me, easiness is about being in a state of flow, a state at peace, a state of ease. So in that case, it is not easier to go with how other people have defined happiness and success. I need to do the work to go inside and figure out what my conscious definitions are for all the reasons I've been pointing out to you here. The potential problem with blindly accepting the cultural narratives from the cultural influencers is that when we don't personally align, the resistance is introduced. Again, we end up working against ourselves. This is not fun. When you work against yourself, it can lead to burnout. One of the 3 components to burnout is exhaustion. So when you put extra resistance into your lives, it's going to take more energy, which this is something that continuously happens in your life, could start leading you into burnout when you also have the other 2 components. The other 2 components, by the way, are self-efficacy, being able to do the work, and cynicism. So burnout is exhaustion, cynicism, and a lack of self-efficacy. But I'm talking more about exhaustion with resistance. So what are some steps? I'm going to introduce 4 steps that we can take towards moving into conscious communication so that we can be more aligned with ourselves and then communicate more clearly with others. Okay, the first one is pause. So it's going to be pause, reflect, pause, listen, and reflect, define. Pause, listen, reflect, define. Those 4 things. Pause. When we take a pause, we interrupt our programmed and unconscious patterns of thinking and reacting. So we pause, we immediately interrupt the react unconscious. So this is a good thing. I'm going to support this with some information from Austrian psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor E. Frankl. Viktor wrote the well-known book Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor alluded to the power of the pause when he talked about a space between stimulus and response. Here's what Viktor said. In that space between stimulus and response, in that space is our power to choose our response. So when we pause, we get to exercise choice, and choice is consciousness. It's not just going without thinking. It's stopping, evaluating, and thinking. So the pause creates the space, which gives us this power. What are we choosing? Well, in my example here, it's how we define words like success and happiness, and then ultimately choosing our actions to align with the destination that will help get us to our definitions for success and happiness. So pause was number 1. The second of the 4 steps is listen. In the stillness of the pause, truly listen versus hear. This is something that we teach about in communication curriculum. To listen is to truly attend to the stimuli and to apply meaning and understanding to what it is that you are hearing. So to listen means to be present, to make sense of it. To hear is simply to pick up on stimuli, and we can choose to ignore what we hear. And for those of us that live in New York, like myself, we often do choose to ignore what we hear on the subway. And there's good reasons sometimes to just hear and ignore. But to truly become conscious communicators, we need to listen, not hear. And the pause allows us the chance to listen. What are we listening to in this pause? Listen to your head and listen to your heart. What are you and aren't you saying to yourself? What are you actually feeling? Not what your head tells you should be feeling, because that comes from conditioning. But what are you actually feeling? And then I love this one. What would you like to be feeling? Because that's about choice, and it's recognizing your responsibility, your own power in being able, at the end of the day, to choose how you feel despite the circumstance. It's not always easy. It's getting into the flow state to be able to move in that direction. And finally, listen with your five senses. So we are equipped with its body with five senses to be able to pick up all this sensory stimuli in the world. And in my culture of the United States, we're often very visual, and that tends to be our dominant. So visual, auditory, taste, smell, touch. Smell is, according to our nonverbal textbook, smell is our most primitive sense. It's connected to the more reptilian part of our brain, the more ancient part of the human brain. So smell is really powerful, and we don't, in our culture of the US, give smell that much attention. So you may not even be conscious of the smells or the touches and the feelings that are around you, because you're paying attention to what you see and what you hear. So listen truly with your five senses. The third step of these four is reflect. So once we have paused, once we have listened, now we reflect. This is where we begin to gain insights. When we reflect, we're looking for patterns in our behaviors and becoming aware of why we do what we do. This part is really what I do as a coach. I help people get to the part of reflect. And it's very helpful to have a coach who's trained in this, because we act like mirrors. It's hard to see yourself. Just as an athlete, you're in your own body, so it's hard to watch yourself. You can use something like a video camera to help you, but even that, you just see what you're doing. It's the trained coach who sees what you're doing and whether it's correct or incorrect, and sees what you're not doing that you should be doing to move to your goal. So reflection is where we gain insights by detecting patterns in our behaviors and becoming aware of why we do what we do. This is good coaching, that area. The fourth one is define. So we were pause, listen, reflect, and finally define. These four. Using what you've learned from the first three steps, how will you now define things like success and happiness for yourself so that it aligns with your head and your heart? So this is giving you choice in how you define these things. So let's get to the point of defining it. I'd be happy to help you with that. Again, feel free to reach out to me. We can talk about coaching options where I can help you learn how to move through these four steps. Really supports you in the reflection and the definition process. Okay, almost done. The reflection tool that I want to offer, it's one that I continuously promote. It's knowing your core values. Why? Because this is more the listen, the step two. Knowing your core values allows you to start to understand you as an individual, what's important to you beyond the cultural programming that you have been placed in. So this is a free survey, which I will put in the show notes. It's called the VIA Character Strengths Survey. Values in Action, VIA Character Strengths Survey. It's at www.viacharacter.org. This is the quote from the product. The VIA survey is the only free scientific survey of character strengths in the world. Take this simple 10-minute character test and discover your greatest strengths. You will need to create an account, but it's free on their website. And as I said, the invitation to work with me is always there. Just send me an email. We'll talk. Once you send me an email, we'll set up a call. I need to talk with you on the phone to really get an idea of what's happening. So quick recap of what we've learned. We learned about the importance of defining things that are so foundational for our lives and not just going with our conditioned and unconscious patterns that have been placed in us. Things like happiness and success, and even how we question how we quantify things like a high salary or a lot of money. I've given you a lot of tools to think about why this is important. And finally, I provided 4 steps to really help you learn how to pause and become more conscious communicators. The 4 steps were pause, listen, reflect, and define. Pause, listen, reflect, define. Ways that you can continue to work with me, and then I'll take any questions you may have. We're almost done here, I see, for the time. I have a monthly LinkedIn newsletter called Conscious Communication. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, Gino Parati, you'll see pinned at the top there is the link to the newsletters. Just click on that pin and it will take you to the newsletter where you can click the subscribe button And those come out usually within the first week of every month. The topic for this month of March will be this: how do we define success? I'm going to give you even more in-depth information that I've just gave you on the discussion today. So if you love this topic today, it'll be a good place to see it in writing and have all those links as well. I do have a LinkedIn group called the Communication and Public Speaking Mentorship Community for coaches, influencers, and entrepreneurs. Feel free to join that group as well. I have a book on Amazon that is for public speaking. It's called From Student to Professional, an essential communication soft skill guide for aspiring professionals. And finally, I do offer one-on-one coaching as well as organizational workshops and speaking engagements. So if you're an individual, we can work together. If you are working for an organization, reach out to me. Let's talk about ways that I can come in and help your team, either with workshops and speaking engagements as well. Okay, thank you for joining. Any questions that you may have? I know it's a pretty deep topic today. I'll pause for about a minute to see if there are any additional questions that have come in. Thank you for everyone who has joined today and everyone who is watching on the recording. Again, I'll pause just a moment, see if anyone's typing. I found this work to be so rewarding and enriching. It does take energy to do the work, and that's where I said my definition of easy earlier. I'm not afraid to do the work. It's going to take steps. It's going to take choices in your lives. It's going to sometimes have you do some things that you're originally not comfortable with. A lot of people don't love digging deep down and asking the question why, because it may bring them to some places that they're not comfortable going within themselves. They may have to accept some things about their current state that they would rather not accept before they can move forward. But in the end, when you move through to the other side of this, then that definition of easiness being a state of ease is very present. So that's the reward. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions for the end of today's session. So I thank you for joining, and look for next month when we will do another LinkedIn Live learning session within the last week or two of the month. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.